If coffee had a capital, it would be Brazil. Did you know that Brazil is the world's largest coffee producer? It's responsible for roughly 1/3 of global output. By the end of this Coffeeist episode, you'll know how to spot and buy an outstanding Brazilian coffee now that they're in season. So let's talk Brazil.
Yeah, well, I tell you, Brazil is tough because my wife's Brazilian. I've probably traveled and spent more time in Brazil by far than any other coffee-growing country. A lot of it not in coffee-growing country, but in Rio, where my wife's from. And Brazil's been in the news because the 30% or so of our coffee that we get from Brazil is threatened by 50% tariff. In other words, 50% gets added on to the cost of green coffee. There's 50% tariff also on Indian coffee, but of course, almost no Indian coffee comes into the United States. It goes to Europe. So it's particularly important for the American coffee industry. The coffee enthusiast, for example, who's not a home roaster, but just likes to drink coffee in cafes and order it online, doesn't really have a solid sense of what Brazil is, I think. Brazil produces usually about 30% of the coffee we drink. Panama probably produces about less than 1%, maybe 1/10 of 1% of the coffee we drink in the United States. But at Coffee Review, on an average year, there are 5 times as many reviews of Panama coffees than there are Brazil coffees. That's because Brazil is just not a leading gourmet origin. On the other hand, almost anybody who's had coffee at a cafe in a given day has drunk Brazilian coffee.
Right.
Because, of course, those espresso blends are heavily Brazil-based. Brazil makes a lovely espresso, and often cafe blends are 100% Brazil. The right Brazils that have been chosen carefully. It's a kind of paradox, right? In other words, it's one of the most important and familiar coffees, and yet probably least talked about or paid attention to until now, when the Trump administration has levied a 50% tariff on Brazilian coffee.
Will that tariff be absorbed by the green coffee importer?
No. Nor the roaster. It's going to go
passed on to the consumer.
Now, of course, in a cafe drink, the amount of coffee, the cost of the drink, is the coffee, the raw material, is minuscule compared with all the other costs of the paying the baristas and renting the space and all of it, the rest of it. But where it's really dramatic is on ground coffee in the supermarket. Supermarket has shot up in price. I don't have a statistic, but generally it's increased, obviously, 30 or 40%, I'd say.
I was going to play devil's advocate and just ask, I don't buy ground coffee, and I know you don't buy ground coffee. Does it matter in bean sales? Does it matter in specialty stores?
No, I don't think it does. I mean, we're used to a Panama will cost a lot of money. Even
Anyway.
So it would take a while for a rise in price in a Brazil to significantly alter the price of a single origin Brazil. Won't go up that much. I mean, the great single origin Brazils probably are fairly pricey already. So I think there's a lot of elasticity in the price and specialty. So that's a good point, Kevin. I'm seeing it really because I read all the industry magazines, and the people are rather alarmed. And what they've discovered, and this is important and interesting for today's show, is that there is no substitute for Brazil in blends. In other words, the discovery that all Brazil that we take for granted, it's just a Brazil, as a unique, the legacy type, the standard Brazil, has a unique profile. There is, even if you spent a lot of money, you couldn't duplicate that profile. So suddenly people are aware, we'll be talking about it today when we taste these coffees, I'm sure. I hope so.
Before Ken and I take another sip, a quick thank you to our November sponsor, Big Shoulders Coffee. They're a Chicago roaster born right here in the city of Big Shoulders. What I love about them, they don't just roast coffee, they educate drinkers, because an educated coffee lover recognizes better coffee, buys better brewing gear, and keeps the taste quality high by brewing to culinary standards, which reflects on the original farm forward to the entire coffee industry, to the person sipping the finished cup worldwide. You can find their coffees and their story at bigshoulderscoffee.com.
And again, I'm talking about what I call the legacy Brazil type, the kind of type of coffee that people, it's a Brazil, and everybody has a kind of a sensory picture or a taste association map of what that Brazil tastes like. That legacy type is the type that's so important to the industry. It's an attractive type. People somehow, Brazil is just associated with ordinary coffee, and if you pay attention to it, to the style, I don't think it's ordinary, and that's what the specialty industry has discovered as they scurry around trying to find substitutes for the pricey Brazil.
It is interesting. I've had a few when I first started drinking expensive coffees, specialty coffees. I really found out quickly that Brazil did have a place even there. And that's what surprised me. I kind of thought, I'm getting away from supermarket coffees. There's not going to be Brazils around, but it seems like all their blends, they all use Brazils in there too. And It seems like they have this real incredible chameleon-like ability to mix. Good mixers, where they don't seem to get in the way. They seem to allow coffee, and they seem like they are complementary to so many other coffees.
Well, as we taste them, we'll probably speculate on why that is. The taste profile is indeed subtle. It's fairly recognizable, too. And that's why I'm amused by all of these people suddenly scurrying around trying to find substitutes for a coffee that they took for granted for so many decades. Brazil grows Robustas too, a special Robusta type called Conilon. Its importance for the specialty industry is in the Arabicas. And the Arabicas, the interesting thing about Brazil is that on one hand, the varieties they grow are common. They're traditional varieties. They've been grown for a long time, and they don't have Robusta genes in them. In other words, they're not hybrids. So you go to some coffee growing countries with high-level reputations, and you'll find a lot of hybrids in the fields. But in Brazil, you don't find that, really. On the other hand, they don't plant distinctive tasting varieties. There's no SL28, the Kenya variety. There's no Gesha. And the reason is because the elevations are low, relatively low for coffee world elevations. And the other reason, I think, is that the industry has sort of cultivated this sort of you can depend on us, middle of the road, we're here for you kind of attitude and profile. Brazilians also have not experimented all that much on any large scale with special processes. When you were trying to source the coffees, you had a hard time finding anything except the classic legacy Brazilian type.
Yeah.
And that legacy Brazilian type is a natural coffee. In other words, dried in the fruit, usually almost always in the sun, and dried very carefully in some cases, dried rather sloppily in other cases, but a natural. And it's a natural that typically doesn't have that fermenty fruit that people
Right.
associate with naturals from Ethiopia or Central America. I think it's part of the Brazilian tradition to handle the drying in such a way that there is no ferment. They've been trying to avoid ferment for their whole history. Their whole industry is based on this classic natural type. In other words, instead of fruit, you get chocolate at its best, which of course is one of the things we value in the Brazils. But above all, you get a nut tone. It's a kind of a natural profile that you get when the drying is thorough. If it's too quick, the nut tones are not that attractive. And if it's handled just right, you get this sort of nut that wants to move over into chocolate with the right roasting. That's the classic type. They have experimented with other types, and the main experiment, or I wouldn't call it an experiment, the more main competing coffee type to natural, they call pulped natural. Everywhere else we call it honey coffee, meaning that the skin's been removed, but this fruit pulp has been allowed to dry on the bean. They also do a type that in Central America is called white honey, and I can't remember what the Brazilians, I think they call it semi-washed, in which the machines take off some of the mucilage. A little bit of the mucilage is left on the bean. So they've specialized in this pulp natural or honey process as well. But as you know, it's very hard to find anything else. There are farms, there are fancy corporate farms, industrial owners who want to become great coffee growers and have their scientists on the farm perform all sorts of fancy processes. They're very hard to find, those coffees. They exist. I think they go to Asia. Buyers who are willing to take a shot at a really high-priced coffee.
I found it strangely comforting, the fact that they are still so committed to these traditional coffees. And it is a traditional taste, and yes, I'm familiar enough with Brazils that I do like a good Brazil just by itself. It doesn't have to be in a blend at all for me. Understated, not maybe that well known, but they're not only good with other coffees, but they play nice with cuisine. You know, if you're talking about having a coffee after dinner, a Brazilian coffee seems like it's always appropriate and has a nice taste, never too much. I wonder why the industry doesn't have more focus on Brazils. I've always wondered that. There are a lot of roasters that don't issue a single origin Brazil.
Yeah, well, it just, they don't pop, they don't stand out, and they don't have a colorful story. The other thing about the Brazil industry, of course, is that the typical Brazil, it's a very highly developed, in some ways rather industrialized coffee production. There are farms in which it's grown like soybeans, really. In other words, in the Bahia area, which is a newly developed area, a kind of plateau area in eastern Brazil, they just have rows and rows and rows of trees, all pruned the same way, and machines, as you probably know, roll down the rows of trees, and there are little fingers that shake the branches, the coffee falls off. It's put in trucks, carried to the mill. But that's an atypical. A more typical situation is a farm of maybe 100 acres or 150 acres, run by a family. The coffee is dried on the farm and then taken to a cooperative mill. Brazilians are really good at, they become really good at, is you have a mix, right? You have unripe fruit, overripe, or dried on the tree, fruit that's dried on the tree already, and ripe fruit all mixed together. So they've become very skillful in their mills at separating those three categories. As you know, in a typical, say, traditional picture book Central American coffee farm, the coffee's hand-picked. It's separated as it is in Brazil, but the Brazilians do it more thoroughly into ripe fruit. And then it's washed, etc. And then there are usually young boys and women from the local area who pick through the beans by hand. Well, of course, now we have computer machines, and the beans fall down in a stream past sensors, and whenever the sensor detects a bean, of course, the technician can set what he's looking for, the size of the bean,
parameters. Yeah.
Particular kind of defect that's common. They can set the machine so it's looking for it, and a little puff of air pops out the bad bean. Just boop, they're streaming by. Boop, boop. It works very well.
And we know what company ends up buying that bean.
Oh, those other beans,
It could be,
yeah.
There are more than one, yeah.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But again, not the stuff that hopefully our audience is drinking.
No, of course not.
Did they still use machines? I know they were the first, I thought, to use machines to actually physically shake the tree with the idea that riper beans, of course, will fall out first. Is that still done?
Oh, yeah. That's what I was saying. That's what happens in the industrialized farms. As I say, you look at these farms, if you could be up on a hill, there's usually no mountains in these the areas where they have these farms. But if you could, you would see rows of coffee trees and machines, these machines, trundling along like this, shaking. And again, I don't think that's really typical of Brazilian production. And particularly the coffees I think we'll taste today are from medium-sized farms, most likely. Some of these medium-sized farms that just would do a standard coffee and send it to the cooperative, they're exporting their own coffee with their name on it, and they're trying to distinguish themselves in the international market and sort of brand their farm and their coffee. And I think we'll probably have some of those. The coffee type tends to be similar. Yeah. It's just better. The distinctions we'll be making today really won't be dramatic to ascribe to a reason. They just probably done better. The one type that Brazil has that's a little distinctive is the Bourbon, right? We all know Bourbon type. Brazil specializes in Bourbon, particularly a type called yellow Bourbon. Sometimes you'll get the Bourbon character in a natural Brazil. It's a kind of certain kind of twisty. It's now I'm at a loss for how to describe it, because I think for an audience who knows coffees, if they like Kenya coffees, characteristic kind of black currant, kind of sweet, savory, tart character of really great Kenyas, that's a kind of a Bourbon characteristic. Wow. So sometimes in Bourbons elsewhere in the world, you get that taste. We may get it in one or two of these coffees, or we may imagine we're getting it. I hope not.
Well, I'm sure going to try. Due to the flatness of the country, the lack of mountains, are we talking about the need for more herbicides and insecticides is there such a thing as an organic Brazil?
Oh, yeah.
There is. Okay, yeah. So it is possible to deal with those issues.
Again, I should emphasize that producing industry in Brazil is huge, right?
Right.
Obviously, the biggest in the world. And so there's places, there are niches for all kinds of ways of defining coffee production. So that I'm very familiar with the farm I visited twice, Cachoeira, Fazenda Cachoeira. And there it's biodynamic. Their coffees are, as you know, with biodynamic, I think, is one of the most demanding of protocols for agriculture. So their coffees are not only organic, they're biodynamic. There are other farms like that. In other words, there's so much going on and so much coffee produced that you can probably find a farm doing almost any approach, except an approach that focuses unique,
right?
Because they don't have the altitude.
Yeah,
and they don't have the
altitude.
And there's no tradition for those coffees either.
Well, it's safer right now to buy Brazils, assuming you can afford them. I also enjoy coffees that are more traditional, that are less the ferment and less the attempt to do new flavors. Even though it's creative, I got to hand it to that, and I don't view myself as a strict traditionalist in any way, but I do like washed and natural coffees.
To tell you the truth, I think a lot of us are coming around that way.
We meet in secret.
Yeah. What happened to that elegant, pure, high-grown cup? Washed cup.
Oh yeah.
Well, I don't know.
That's what got me here. And now I feel like,
I got bubble gum. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. If the wrapper's too colorful on the coffee.
Right. This is off the subject, but I'll just toss it out. I think there's a certain amount of damage been done to the goal of appreciating and understanding coffee on a sensory level by this business of putting 3 adjectives on the bag. Right. So it gets everybody looking for blueberry,
pecan, hazelnut in effect,
pink grapefruit. The habit of identifying, of sort of focusing all the sensory scope and pleasure of a fine coffee in 3 adjectives that are flavor notes, I think has been a disservice, because one of the virtues that roasters talk about in terms of selling these new processed coffees, the anaerobic processes, is that some of the flavor notes or aroma notes are so striking that consumers can get them.
Yeah, right. Exactly. We do it because we can do it.
Yeah,
it's fascinating that we can do it. I definitely applaud their innovation, but I really want a different taste.
We don't want to sound like two cranky old guys here.
Well, everyone's got to be expecting that from 2 cranky old guys.
Yeah. Right. So maybe we should.
Do you have problems keeping kids walking on your lawn like I do? I'll tell you what. I feel like tasting some coffee. What about you?
Let's do that. Yeah.
Okay. People keep asking about this hat. It's our Coffeeists Cap, part of the specialty coffee life. It's a great conversation starter. I've literally had people stop me in cafes just to talk coffee. Grab one for yourself or for the coffee lover in your life at coffeeists.com, because good taste shouldn't stop at your mug. Oh, hi, Ken.
Yeah, that good taste shouldn't stop at your mug. Well, I mean, people would have different opinions about the cap, I think, in terms of taste, etc. But, I don't have a cap. In other words, I'm here in San Francisco, not in Chicago, with big shoulders and so on. And I don't have my Coffeeist cap. So what am I going to do? I kind of walk out and people won't even know that I'm associated with this terrific show.
If you want to become a coffee genius, subscribe. Each week we taste, test, and teach our way to better beans together.